Hello, everybody. It's Eston. Today, I wanted to sort of take on a new topic. It's sort of related to the privilege conversations that have been going on in the other videos that I've done so far. Um, but it's really maybe opening up a whole new, topic of conversation. And that topic is masculinity. In the privilege videos so far that we've talked about, sort of been on the topic of privilege, we've talked about different groups that are more or less privileged, and, by all accounts, males are the most privileged group in speaking of North America, which is where is really the only my focus, because that's what I can speak to most, because since I am North American. But I think probably generally speaking around the world, this is the case. But maleness and masculinity is sort of a very, very general subject. It's a very, very general label. Because for masculinity, there's not an organized academic study of it in the sense that there is for femininity, which would be feminism. There's not the same academic scrutiny so far to masculinity, from my understanding. And if there is more, I'd love to hear more as some topic that I am very interested in learning about at the moment. But from what I understand of it, there's not this sort of organized, this not taught in universities, for example, whereas feminist thought is. So I think that, the background of that's probably that the feminist thought has been the thought that's been othered throughout history. So masculine thought would be just considered to be what most philosophy has been in history, at least in Western history up to this point. So that may be true and it may not be true. That's just sort of what the view I hold at the moment for the background. But within masculinity itself, within maleness itself, there's a very wide range of behaviors. And, I think this is really interesting to deconstruct. And this is sort of where feminists, by studying feminism, you can also learn a whole lot about masculinity through studying feminism. Because of that that dominant and other relationship that they've historically had. So within masculinity means different things to different groups of men. So there is one sort of masculine norm for this group, and then there's another masculine norm for maybe another group. In a diverse culture like the United States, this can mean a wide range of behaviors. So there's a masculinity, there's a masculinity, for example, among different ethnic and racial groups. There's different masculinities for different religious groups. There's even different masculinities for different sort of socioeconomic, educational level groups. And so, I just think this is such an interesting topic right now, because what's the masculine norm for one group is not necessarily the masculine norm for another group. Now, we can step back from that and say that, generally speaking, all these masculine groups are still the privileged group in their even in their subgroups, and then also in the culture as a whole, this definitely can be said to be masculine dominated, I think. But this sort of differentiation of masculine behavior is, I think, very interesting. And one area that I'd just like to highlight, because it comes from my own experience, is in the gay male world, where there are different levels of masculinity, and they're viewed differently among many gays. So there is, what they call butch, which is a more masculine, what would be considered to me quote unquote straight acting type man. And then there's more. There's on down. There's on. I won't say on down because that suggests a hierarchy. And while this has been studied to a degree, and there's actually some documentaries I think on this subject, that there has been different status levels throughout the gay culture in the United States. Again, I'm only speaking of that gay culture, where the more masculine acting gay men are more or more just considered more desirable, or more I guess more mainstream than feminine, more feminine, more determined men determined to act more feminine. So I think this is really interesting too. And this might touch on a subject that I think is really interesting that I'm learning about now, and that's toxic masculinity. And that toxic masculinity is it's the area where it's the masculinity. It's how men are harmed by a patriarchal culture. So this is toxic masculinity would probably mean different things to different men. So it might be one of those things like me right now. It's hard to actually put into words what I, and put into a focused sort of description of what I think the definition is of toxic masculinity. It's one of those things like art, sort of like, I'm not exactly sure how to define it, but I know it when I see it type thing. I definitely felt it. I've definitely actually participated in it at periods of time in my life. But it is a structure of masculinity that men can be expected to perform in their cultural group to the detriment of their own individual creativity or their own individual development, meaning they stifle some area of themselves, or they repress some area of themselves because they feel like it doesn't fit into the masculine norm of their culture. So again, this means different things for different men depending on what culture you're primarily functioning in. And you may function across several. You may function in a religious culture, you may function in a academic culture or an employment type culture. You may function in your social culture might have one dynamic, and your family culture might have another dynamic. And all these conflicting views and conflicting demands on masculinity is sort of, I think, what toxic masculinity could be. Toxic masculinity would be a form of masculinity that causes the man to have to, or feel the need to, subvert himself or repress himself. So that might be like, for example, being creative or liking to do something like creative. Creative might be considered in that culture a feminine art or something like that. Like maybe the man, likes something like knitting, or would like to learn something like knitting or weaving, or to play the harp or the flute, or something like this, but yet his masculine culture that he's surrounded by forbids that type of behavior. So it pushes him into another area. He might not like sports. He may force himself to follow them because he needs to be able to interact maybe at work or in some other social group that he feels like he needs for status. He needs to actually understand sports and follow it. So he may force himself, in an interest he doesn't particularly like, in order to have the status he feels like he needs in that group. So I think that's extremely interesting topic to discuss. And then I think an area I've been thinking a lot about lately as far as this type of identity goes, all through the privilege conversation, I've been thinking about this is identity. It's said that we may be we meaning humans, may be on the verge of a technological shift where our computer and our artificial intelligence is getting is increasing so rapidly that there may come a time in the not so distant future, the next 100 years or so, where artificial intelligence actually achieves a sort of sentience and can learn on its own and gets its own identity and becomes basically a sentient being. Not a human, but a sentient being. So it'd be a non-human. And, like we talked about in a previous video, where humans right now have the ultimate privilege. There may come a time where an AI, actually a non-human, would have the most privilege because maybe they're the smartest and they've achieved the most power at that point. But I think, that's a different topic. But I think the interesting thing about AI like this is identity around certain things like gender, like masculinity and femininity, and also, sexuality to a degree, because an AI won't necessarily have any of those things. So an AI could be in human form because they could be put into a humanoid type body, but it wouldn't be either gender unless somehow the programmers of it felt like they needed to add this level of detail to it when they were developing it, or the AI itself may just take on certain attributes that we would consider masculine or we would consider feminine, but they wouldn't necessarily be, because the AI itself, the entity itself, would not be traditionally categorized into one of these two groups, since they would have been born without any gender at all. And gender identification is complex amongst humans too, and there are people who identify with both genders or with neither gender too. So humans already exist at this level of complexity. It's just interesting to me that AI, a lot of times that you see in science fiction movies for the future, it definitely will have a persona of one or the other genders, either a masculine role, and that's probably just so that the audience can identify with it. But I think that's a great topic for a future conversation. So this went by really fast. I hope it was somewhat clear. I just really wanted to open up a topic of conversation around masculinity and around gender. If you want to continue the conversation with me, you can head over to my blog at earnestlyeston.blogspot.com, and I'll put the link to it down in the details. You can head on over to Facebook and see me at Earnestly Eston there, or you could leave a comment here, be here at YouTube. So I'd love to continue the conversation with you, but if you don't want to continue it with me, just continue it on with your friends or with your social group, or just have a dialogue with yourself on the topic. The important thing is to keep thinking about the topics and keep the conversation going. So that's it for now. I hope to check back in with you soon with some more interesting topics. And until then, hope to see you soon. Bye.